And now, please welcome Laimon Eglentals.
It was April 2002, and a young Indonesian girl found herself alone, abandoned, adrift. She was on her own. There'd be no more help for her. She was lost out at sea. She had no hope as she slowly watched her only access of rescue, her only hope of salvation, drifted past over the horizon, and now there would be nothing more for her. She would be out in a vast ocean, another unknown story, another unknown victim, in a world that seemingly didn't care, who didn't know she was there, and had no idea what was happening. She was there, and seeing her future, it would be one of thirst, one of starvation, one of abandonment, one of exposure, and most likely going down with the ship whenever it did manage to sink. Her name was Hokget. Hokget means, in Hokkien, it means blessed, all that is good, fortunate. But it seemed like all of that had run out in her life. Her story and how she got there and to be so alone was she was on board a ship, and it was called the Inseko 1907. And what happened on that ship is that there was a fire, and that fire slowly smouldered and burnt out, and the ship was left as an adrift without any controls, and the crew that were on it had gone up to the bridge, but all their communication had been cut. They couldn't tell anyone that they were there, that they were out in the ocean, where they were or the situation they were in. The ship itself was basically a floating fuel tanker, and it would go out and fuel all the fishing boats that would come up to it in fishing areas of the Pacific Ocean. But it was a stateless ship. The owner didn't register it. No one knew where it was and what was happening. The crew on board were adrift for 3 weeks, just hoping and praying that eventually that they would be found somewhere by someone. A passing cruise ship on its way back to Honolulu, the Norwegian Star, saw this boat adrift, and they came over and they went along beside it, and they docked, and they were able to rescue the captain and all his crew. One man had died in the fire on board the ship, but 11 of them were safe now that they were rescued. But they didn't take Hokget. As the crew were watching on the Norwegian Star, as the vessels pulled away, one man was there and saw and filmed this small little dog that was barking madly away as the ship pulled out back towards Honolulu. Hokget was the captain's young pet dog who was left all on her own now, and no one knew where she would be or where she would end up. A few days later, the ship pulled back into port, and the person who had actually filmed this young little dog barking took the story to an animal society when they got back and said, "We can't just let this poor dog be on its own." That group ran the story in the local news. The local media took it up, and people all over Hawaii saw this young dog named Hokget as it was barking wildly. And now, where was it? Was she still alive? International news picked up this story, and soon everyone around the world was talking about Hokget. Where was she? Was she okay? Money started pouring in, and soon there was thousands and thousands of dollars with people calling out, wanting to rescue this poor dog lost at sea. They chartered a jet to look and try to find where Hokget might have got to. But in the Pacific Ocean, having to cover hundreds of thousands of miles, and who knows where the ship could have drifted to, they weren't able to find or locate the Inseko and where it was. Everyone was asking questions. Where was she? Was the ship still afloat? Had it sunk? Had it drifted out somewhere that no one would know where it was? Did it go down in a storm? What happened to Hokget? There was many people who would have their kids and their children would come up to them and they'd ask, "Daddy, Daddy, have they found the dog at sea yet? Is it rescued?" Well, 1 week later, a fishing boat did manage to spot the Insiko, who was floating adrift. They came over and pulled alongside it, but because of the damage to the ship from its previous fire, they weren't able to get on board, and they didn't see if Hotget was still alive. But they did have a location. They did know and could plan by the currents where the ship was adrift to. Because of all the media attention and focus on Hotget, the US Coast Guard was sent out. And the Coast Guard flew out a Hercules transport to go and see if they could find this ship where it was adrift. And as they searched for hours on end, they did manage to find and see this small ship in the ocean floating past. But what everyone wanted to know was Hotget. Was she still alive? Was she still on board? Was she able to survive this journey on her own? The crew flew as low as they could. They lowered the cargo ramp and they could see with their cameras she was there. She was running around on deck. They made another pass and what I think might be the world's longest pizza run. They grabbed the food they had on board, which was some pizzas and some other food, and they put it down the cargo ramp, and as they flew over, they threw it to Hotget so she wouldn't starve as she waited. Now they knew a location. There was a fishing vessel in the area that came through and was able to pull up besides the Insiko. They managed to get on board, but as they did and were walking around, and they did see Hotget, but Hotget was too scared and jumped below deck. The people there was like, it was a burnout ship. It was too dangerous for them to be able to rescue her. They had to pull off that ship and go back on their own boat. But after all this time, and now that they knew where they were, everyone was adamant they had to save Hotget. They called in the US Navy, and the US Navy couldn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to save a dog that had drifted out to sea. But they could do this. They could use a fund for environmental protection to be able to take the oil off the ship because the Insiko was headed towards the Johnston Atolls. And the Johnston Atolls needed to be environmentally protected. For any of you who do know, the Johnston Atolls was where the US conducted hundreds of nuclear tests and one of the most irradiated spots on Earth. But everyone knew the real reason the US Navy was called in was to save Hotget. They sent out a tugboat and the captain got on board and he was able to find Hotget, grab her by the scruff of the neck and take her back onto the tugboat so she could go back to Honolulu. Hotget was known as a resourceful dog because she was able to survive a month on an abandoned ship, be able to drink rainwater, to be able to have meals, whatever she could find, and throw in over pizza that would help her live. And she was also known as a very loyal dog who would be right beside the captain all the way on as they returned to Hawaii. As the ships pulled into shore, she was greeted with a hero's welcome. She was like a celebrity. What would happen is now a friend of the captain would take her into his own home, and Hotget would live in paradise in the islands of Hawaii. As I tell you this story about Hotget, who was lost at sea, it reminds me of another story in the Bible, and it is a story of a lost sheep. And as we find in Luke 15, it talks about the good shepherd who was going out to rescue the sheep that was lost. There was 99 that were safe, but they had to go out and rescue this one lost sheep. As we have a modern day equivalent where they had to go out and rescue one lost dog. The Father would spare no resources to go out and search for and seek which was lost. He couldn't leave someone alone, someone abandoned, someone whose only hope in the future would be death. But that's not the only thing that I get when I hear about Hotget and the story of when she was lost at sea. If you see beside me, as you read over the writing, it says, word spreads fast. And we look at Hokget, the word of Hokget spread very fast. Because she called out with all her might at one moment in her life, she was able to gain the attention of someone who had a camera, who was able to give that information to the media, who was able to get her story out throughout the world. Even though she was on her own, because of her testimony, she was able to let millions of people know, and that ultimately led to her rescue. Word about Hokget spread fast. But the other thing that's important, if word is to spread fast of the condition here, is there has to be a story. There has to be a testimony. There has to be telling about what has been done. And Hokget did that as she was on board the ship, that her rescue was slowly going apart, pulling away. She was barking. She was telling her story. And it was filmed there for all the world to see. It reminds me of a verse that we find in the end of the Bible. In Revelation 12, verse 11, it says this: "They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." We have a story of our own. What has God done for us? How has Jesus affected and impacted our life? It doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to be elaborate. But God has touched us each individually. And as he's done that, what is our testimony? What is our story? What is stopping us from telling our story, whatever that might be? We're here and we talk about word spreading fast. Word will spread fast when we share our testimony. And as we share our testimony, just talk about the good things that God has done for us in our lives.
To help you understand God's Word in a whole new way, go to goodnewsunlimited.com. You can sign up there to get your free devotional delivered to you each day. This program has been paid for by the partners and friends of Good News Unlimited. Word spreads fast.